October 1st, 2013. The Glen Park Public Library, San Francisco. A man sits alone in the science fiction section. Laptop open. Logged into an admin panel that controls the largest criminal marketplace the internet has ever seen. He doesn't know it yet, but in the next 4 seconds, everything he built is going to end. A woman starts screaming at the table next to him. He looks up. His hands leave the keyboard. That's the mistake. That's all it takes. Agents disguised as library patrons rip off their jackets. FBI vests underneath. They grab the laptop before he can close the lid. They pin him against the window. His name is Ross Ulbricht. For 2 years, he was known only as Dread Pirate Roberts, the man behind Silk Road, a hidden marketplace that moved $183 million in illegal drugs, protected by encryption the government couldn't crack. And he was caught. Not by breaking that encryption, but because he forgot to close a laptop. This is the story of how he built it. How 2 federal agents investigating him turned out to be criminals themselves. And how, 12 years later, this story would end in the Oval Office. Before any of that, before the empire, before the murder for hire, before the pardon, Ross Ulbricht was just a 26-year-old with a physics degree from Austin, Texas, and a failed used book business. Sit with that for a second. The same man who would go on to run the dark web's most notorious criminal empire had just failed at selling second-hand books online. Ulbricht was a true believer in libertarian philosophy. Not casually, with the kind of fervor that makes a person genuinely think they can reshape society. He'd posted online about building a world where people would be, in his words, freer than any that have come before. He was about to try. In February 2011, Ulbricht launched Silk Road, a hidden service on the Tor network. Tor routes traffic through layers of encrypted relays, making it extraordinarily difficult to trace who's accessing what. He paired that with Bitcoin, a currency most people had barely heard of at the time, allowing buyers and sellers to exchange money with no identifying information attached. The combination was revolutionary and genuinely terrifying. For the first time in history, you could buy illegal drugs with the same ease as ordering a book online. Except this bookstore sold heroin. The site started small. Then in June 2011, just months after launch, Gawker published a feature exposing Silk Road to the internet. Everything exploded. Traffic surged. Vendors flooded in. Ulbricht, operating under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts, lifted straight from The Princess Bride, suddenly found himself running something far larger than a personal libertarian experiment. By 2012, Silk Road was doing $22 million in sales every 6 months. By 2013, $40 million in the same window. A guy who couldn't sell used books had built a criminal marketplace pulling in tens of millions per cycle. Completely anonymous, behind a pirate's alias, on a corner of the internet most people didn't know existed. Court documents from his eventual trial described Silk Road as a full ecosystem. Private messaging, a public forum, a wiki with usage guides, dedicated customer support, vendor ratings, buyer reviews, an escrow system for disputes. This wasn't a crude black market swap meet. It had the infrastructure of Amazon, built by one person for illegal goods. The government estimated thousands of vendors used Silk Road to move approximately $183 million in illegal drugs between 2011 and 2013. Some estimates place total sales above $1 billion. Ulbricht personally collected commission on every transaction. Prosecutors estimated roughly $22 million a year in his own pocket. Here's what makes this story genuinely disturbing. Ulbricht didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a revolutionary. In his own journals, in his private messages as Dread Pirate Roberts, he framed Silk Road as a moral project, a blow against government overreach, a free market operating exactly as a free market should. He believed it, sincerely. And that gap between how Ulbricht saw himself and what the evidence would eventually show he was actually doing is the fault line that cracks this entire story wide open. Because while Ulbricht believed he was the revolutionary and the government were the villains, some of the federal agents assigned to bring him down were doing something genuinely unconscionable. The Baltimore Silk Road Task Force was a multi-agency operation built specifically to identify Dread Pirate Roberts. DEA Special Agent Carl Force was its lead undercover operative. 15 years as a federal agent, exactly the kind of person you'd want hunting a criminal enterprise. Between 2012 and 2013, Force was in regular private contact with Ulbricht, under the alias Knob, posing as a drug smuggler useful to DPR. Ulbricht trusted him. That trust was real. Force used every inch of it. While running that undercover persona, Force created an additional alias, Death from Above, and used it to extort Ulbricht directly. Tried to squeeze him for $250,000, claiming he knew Ulbricht's real identity. At the same time, as Knob, he offered to sell Ulbricht inside information about the very investigation closing in on him. Claimed he had a corrupt law enforcement contact feeding him intelligence. That contact didn't exist. Force was inventing the corruption he was selling, while committing actual corruption with the other hand. Then there's Sean Bridges, a Secret Service agent and computer forensics expert, also on the Baltimore Task Force. In January 2013, the task force arrested Curtis Green, a Silk Road support rep who agreed to cooperate. Green handed over his login credentials, showed them how to access vendor accounts, how to reset passwords. That afternoon, Bridges left the debriefing early. That same afternoon, Silk Road suffered a massive Bitcoin theft, traced directly to Green's account. Bridges had used the credentials Green just handed over to steal from the marketplace he was supposed to be investigating. He liquidated the stolen Bitcoin into roughly $820,000 in cash, laundering it through Mt. Gox before moving it into personal investment accounts. When Ulbricht traced the theft back to Curtis Green's account, he drew exactly the wrong conclusion. Convinced Green had robbed him, Ulbricht turned to the one person on Silk Road he trusted for something extreme. He turned to Knob. He turned to Carl Force, and he asked him to arrange a hit on Curtis Green. This is where the gap between Ulbricht as revolutionary and Ulbricht as criminal collapses completely. Force accepted the commission. He and Green staged Green's death, faked photographs of the execution, sent them to Ulbricht as proof. Green was alive. The whole thing was theater. But what Ulbricht had done, what he believed he had done, was order a man killed to protect his operation. The corruption of Force and Bridges didn't become public until March 2015, over a year after Ulbricht's arrest. By then, the evidence against him was already locked in. When Ulbricht's defense tried to introduce their corruption at trial, arguing it contaminated the entire investigation, the court blocked most of it. The jury that convicted him never fully heard what the agents investigating him had actually been doing. Force eventually pleaded guilty to extortion, money laundering, and obstruction. Bridges pleaded guilty to money laundering and obstruction. Both went to prison. And Ulbricht, the man they'd been investigating, was already serving a life sentence by the time their crimes became public record. But before any of that corruption became known, the government still had to actually catch him. And the way they did it is one of the most surreal moments in this entire story. Because the man running one of the most sophisticated anonymous criminal networks ever built was unmasked through a trail of mistakes so ordinary, they're almost embarrassing. It started with a username. In Silk Road's earliest days, Ulbricht had promoted the site on drug forums under the handle Altoid. That same username showed up in a completely separate post. A programming forum, someone named Altoid asking a coding question, leaving a personal email address as contact info. That email address contained his full legal name. The man who built an entire anonymous empire, who routed his traffic through encrypted relays, who built private messaging systems specifically to hide identities, had, in the very beginning, typed his real name into a public forum and walked away. IRS investigator Gary Alford found that connection in mid-2013. The revolutionary had been undone by a Google search. From there, the net tightened fast. Investigators placed his San Francisco residence under surveillance, confirmed someone was logging into the Silk Road server from within a few hundred feet of his home. In July 2013, Homeland Security agents knocked on his door directly. He refused to answer questions. They left. They came back. October 1st, 2013. Ulbricht walked to the Glen Park Library, sat down in the science fiction section, opened his laptop. Homeland Security agent Jared Duryegian had spent nearly 2 years embedded inside Silk Road as an undercover administrator, screen name Cirrus. He was watching. The moment Ulbricht logged into the admin panel, Duryegian started to chat, pulling DPR's attention to a flagged message, keeping him logged in, keeping the session active. Then a female undercover agent approached and screamed, loud enough to startle him. His hands left the keyboard for 1 second. Agents at the same table stood up, stripped off their outer layers. FBI vests underneath. They grabbed the laptop before he could close it, pinned him against the window. The man who'd ordered a killing, who'd built a $183 million criminal ecosystem, who genuinely believed he was untouchable behind layers of encryption, was handcuffed in the science fiction section of a public library, while the librarian had no idea what was happening. That open laptop was the entire case. Live access to the admin panel, his private messages as DPR, his personal journal, his financial records, all unencrypted, all sitting right there on the screen. If he'd closed the lid for even 1 second, the encrypted drive locks and the government's case gets significantly harder. The empire fell the same way it was built, through human decisions, not through code. The trial opened in January 2015. The prosecution walked the jury through the $183 million in sales, the commission structure, his private journal entries, describing the paranoia, the isolation, the growing gap between his philosophy and his reality. They played his communications as DPR, including the murder for hire of Curtis Green, which never actually happened, but which Ulbricht believed had. His defense argued the corruption of Force and Bridges had contaminated the entire investigation, raised the possibility someone else had been operating the DPR account, that Ulbricht was a fall guy. It was a creative argument. But the evidence on that open laptop was catastrophically specific. His journal, his ledgers, his messages. There was no version of that evidence pointing anywhere else. The jury convicted him on all 7 counts. February 2015. Deliberations took less than 4 hours. Judge Catherine Forrest sentenced him to 2 life sentences plus 40 years. No parole, no review, no path out. She read letters from families of people who died from drugs bought on Silk Road. She said the sentence was proportionate to what he'd built. Ulbricht appealed. Every argument, Fourth Amendment violations, trial errors, the corrupted investigation, the sentence itself. In May 2017, the Second Circuit affirmed everything. No reversible error. The empire dismantled. The man behind it facing the rest of his life in federal prison. Except the story wasn't finished. Because outside that courtroom, something had been building for years. A movement. One that would eventually reach the White House. During the 2024 campaign, Trump told the Libertarian Party convention directly, "If you vote for me, on day 1, I will commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht to a sentence of time served." The room erupted. Think about what that moment actually represents. A man who built an anonymous criminal empire on the dark web had become a campaign promise. Trump fulfilled it. A full and unconditional pardon. On his first full day in office, not the first week, the first day. Ulbricht was 40 years old when the pardon came through. He'd served over 11 years of a life sentence. In a video message after his release, he said, "I was doing life without parole, and I was locked up for more than 11 years, but he let me out. I'm a free man now. So let it be known that Donald Trump is a man of his word." Here's where the fault line this story has been tracing finally cracks all the way through. The question Judge Forrest thought she'd settled in 2015, was Ulbricht a dangerous criminal who deserved life in prison, or a misguided idealist handed a wildly disproportionate sentence, never actually got settled. It just moved venues. From the courtroom to the internet, to the campaign trail, to the Oval Office. Trump called the punishment ridiculous. Said the prosecutors were the same lunatics involved in what he called the weaponization of government against him, which is an extraordinary thing to say about a prosecution that included documented evidence of a murder-for-hire commission. Prosecutors alleged drugs sold on Silk Road caused 6 deaths. Alleged Ulbricht solicited murders of people he saw as threats, though he was never convicted of that, and no evidence showed anyone was actually killed. Those facts don't disappear because a pardon was signed. They sit right alongside it, unresolved. What Ulbricht built, the Tor-routed, Bitcoin-powered marketplace that moved hundreds of millions in illegal goods, changed the internet in ways that outlasted the site itself. Every dark web marketplace that came after was built in its image. The escrow systems, the vendor ratings, the anonymous currency, all of it became a template. The empire was dismantled in October 2013. But the blueprint was already out there. Dread Pirate Roberts is gone. The world he built is still running. Ross Ulbricht genuinely believed he was building something righteous. The government genuinely believed it was dismantling something monstrous. Two of the agents assigned to bring him down were committing crimes while they did it. The judge who sentenced him to life watched that sentence overturned by a presidential pardon. And somewhere in the gap between all of those competing truths, between the Libertarian Manifesto and the Murder Commission, between the revolutionary and the criminal, is the actual story of Silk Road. It's one of the most genuinely disturbing things the internet has ever produced. If this one got under your skin, subscribe. Because next, we're going deeper into the marketplaces that came after.